Welcome to part 2 of this 2-part Endgame DVD series. In this DVD, we're going to study some very complicated endgames. This DVD is designed for people with a rating from 1800 all the way up to World Championship level. So if you're watching this and you're a Grandmaster or an International Master, you'll learn a lot from studying this material. I learnt a lot from studying it myself, so hopefully I can pass on some of that knowledge to you. When it comes to learning, repetition is key. You need to look at each example, try and study it for yourself, have a think about what you'd do in this situation, and then I'll explain it to you. Remember, the key part about endgames is to learn the basic ideas. If you know the basic ideas, you'll be able to work out the moves for yourself. When you get to an endgame situation, you often don't have much time to think about what the best moves are and what the best plan is. So by knowing the basics, it will help a lot, and hopefully you'll be able to play a lot better in the endgame part of the game than your opponent, who probably hasn't studied endgames at all. And nowadays, everyone focuses so much on opening theory, but in my opinion, endgame theory is far more important than opening theory, because the vast majority of games are decided in the endgame. So I hope you enjoy this second DVD. It should be good fun, should be entertaining, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from it. So let's have a look at some examples. Now we're going to have a look at the endgame Queen against Rook. This is a position from the game Peter Svidler against David Howell. It was played very recently, in 2010. The endgame was quite a long endgame, which started off with Queen against Rook and 2 pawns, and eventually got down to Queen against Rook, and Svidler then won with Queen against Rook. We're going to be analysing Queen against Rook and pawn later on in the DVD, but to start off with, let's have a look at Queen against Rook. In this position, Black played Rook to E1 check. However, Black could have played Rook to F5 check, and he could set up what's known as the third rank defence, which is the toughest defence that Black can set up with a king and rook against a king and queen. After Rook to F5 check, White plays King takes E6. And now Black plays Rook to F4. Now the basic principles of defending with a third rank defence is to keep your rook a nice square away from your opponent's king, cutting the king off so that the king can't get close enough to your king to give checkmate. Now Queen against Rook is a technically winning position, and this position is winning for White. However, by using a third rank defence, if you ever get to a position with Queen against Rook, you can make it very difficult for your opponent to make progress and make it very difficult for them to win. Let's see how it works. White plays Queen to C7, Rook to F6 check, King to E5, Rook to F5 check, King to E4, and Rook back to F6, keeping the rook a nice square away from the king. White plays Queen to G3 check, and now King to H5. White plays King to E5, and Black plays Rook to G6. So this is a third rank defence. Black's just keeping the White king away from his own king, so White can't give an easy checkmate. Now, if White was to play King E6 in this position, Black could just play Rook F8, and just keep using the same technique to hold the draw. So in order for White to make progress, he has to do some moves which are quite unnatural. His queen looks to be very powerfully placed on G3, however he's going to have to move it away from that very strong square in order to try and find a way to force his king past the Black Rook's defence on the third rank. The best move here is Queen to D3. Black plays King to G5. If Black was to play Rook to F8, this would be a big mistake, and White could win quickly with Queen to H7 check. And after King to G5, Queen to G7 check, and Black's lost his rook. So after Queen to D3, Black's best move is King to G5. Now Queen to D8 check, King to G6, and Queen to G8 check. So White does these clever queen moves in order to force the Black Rook off this F-file. By playing Queen to D3 and then Queen to D8 in this way, he was able to force the black rook away from the f-file, and in this position black has to play rook to g7. Now white successfully forced the rook off his optimal file, and that allows the white queen to move, the white king to move closer to the h-file. So after rook to g7, white could play queen to e6 check. Black plays king to h7, and now white could play king to f5, moving his king closer to the black king. The black rook has been forced into a bad position. Black plays rook to g2. White plays queen to f7 check, king to h6, queen to f6 check, king to h7, and queen to h4 check. After black plays king to g7, white can now play queen to d4 check. And this is a very important manoeuvre. By continually checking the black king, white forces the black king into a bad position, but at the same time he moves his queen to d4, which covers the f2 square, and that allows him to move his king to a stronger position. Now after black plays king to h7, white's able to play king to f6, and black can no longer check the king from behind. So sometimes in this kind of endings, you think of the move that you want to play. White wants to play king f6. You think of the problem. The problem is that black was going to check him from behind. So white has to prepare the move king f6 by doing a few...
40 minutes late. Well played, mate. Well played. Oh, dear.
I think you survived that.
Bad way to lose a drink.
That's why it's important to practice your endings. Okay, now on to the first puzzle for the 1800 to 2200 category. This position is black to play and draw. Remember, if black just makes a random move, queen against rook is always winning, so every move has to be quite forcing. You can also take into account some of the ideas you've learnt earlier, some of the possible stalemate traps, and see if you can find a way for black to force a draw in this position. Pause the DVD now and have a go at solving it. In order to draw this endgame, black has to give check on every move. If he gives white a spare move, then white will always be winning. So to draw this endgame, black plays rook to h7 check. White plays king to g2, and now rook to g7 check. If the white king comes to the f-file, for example king f3, then black can play rook to f7 and win white's queen. Therefore, instead of king to f3, white plays king to h3. Black plays rook to h7 check, king to g4, rook to g7 check, king to h5, rook to h7 check, and now for white to make any progress, he could play, for example, he could play king to g5, but then simply rook to g7 check, king to h6, rook to h7 check, king to g6, and now comes the key point of the ending. If you saw this idea at the beginning, you'd have got the solution very easily. Black plays rook to h6 check. A very strong move. White can't afford to ignore the rook because then black could take the queen. But after king takes h6, it's stalemate.